Have you ever believed in a promise so deeply that you built your entire future around it? Clara Mayfield did. She held a letter in her hands, worn and creased from the journey it had taken. The words were simple, but full of hope. It promised her a home on a hillside, a kind man with rough, steady hands, a roof that wouldn't leak when the rain came, a bed warm enough to chase away the cold, and enough food to fill more than just her belly. It even promised chickens, 7 of them, for fresh eggs every morning. Imagine stepping onto a train, leaving everything familiar behind, chasing not just a man but the life he offered. Clara packed her life into 2 trunks and tucked a fragile hope deep in her chest. She boarded the train to Dry Creek, believing in a future she hadn't yet seen. But life, as it tends to do, doesn't always deliver what was promised. When Clara stepped off at Dry Creek Station, there was no man waiting for her. No warm smile, no sign with her name. Just a dusty platform, a restless wind, and a boy, barefoot, maybe 10 years old, staring at her with eyes that had already seen too much. "You Clara Mayfield?" he asked, her voice caught in her throat. "Yes," the boy nodded. "Pa's dead. Snake bite. Buried him ourselves 2 days ago. Can you imagine what it feels like to have your future collapse in a single sentence?" Clara tightened, her grip on her bag. She tried to argue with reality. "I was supposed to marry him," she whispered. "He sent for me." "He did," the boy said. "Wrote that letter after he was bit. Told us maybe you'd come anyway." And then Clara learned the truth. There weren't just dreams waiting for her on that hillside. There were 7 children, or 6, now since one, little Jenny, had died last winter. Sam, the boy, was the oldest. The baby was still nursing. Clara stood there, the train hissing behind her, ready to leave, and thought about everything she had lost. She wasn't stepping into the life she had been promised. She was stepping into a house full of ghosts and hollow bellies, and yet she didn't turn back. Maybe you've had moments like that too, moments where the easy choice is to leave, to run, to believe that what you came for no longer exists. But sometimes what we find instead is bigger than what we dreamed. Clara didn't come for love. She didn't come for comfort. She came, unknowingly, for something far greater. She came for the chance to build a home, not from bricks or promises, but from the simple, stubborn act of staying when it would be easier to leave. If you had been Clara, what would you have done? It's easy to think we know the answer. Easy to believe we'd be brave when the moment comes. But true courage often looks quieter than we imagine. It looks like a woman in worn boots, following a barefoot boy beyond the ridge, toward a house too small to hope in, and choosing to stay. Anyway, what would you do if you realized your best-laid plans had crumbled, and all you had left was a choice? Clara Mayfield stood on that dusty platform, 2 trunks at her feet, and a hollow ache in her chest. Behind her, the train hissed like it already knew she wasn't getting back on. In front of her, a barefoot boy named Sam waited. His clothes were worn thin, his face set in a way no child's face should be. When Sam asked if she was coming, Clara didn't say much. She just tightened her grip on the worn handles of her luggage and nodded, and so they walked. Past the cracked depot, through the brittle grass, over the low ridge where the land stretched wide and empty. At the end of the trail stood a house, not much of one. 1 room wide, porch boards sagging, a chimney barely clinging to its stones. If you looked too long, you might think a strong wind could topple it. But Clara didn't turn away. Maybe because sometimes, even the smallest shelters can hold more than just walls. They can hold the pieces of something worth rebuilding. Inside, the house smelled of ash and boiled beans, of cloth that hadn't been washed in weeks. It was dim, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. When they did, she found them, the children. 6 pairs of eyes stared back at her from around a rough-hewn table. The baby slept near the fire in a wooden crate lined with a patchwork quilt. No one spoke. Sam dropped her trunk with a heavy thud and pulled out the only unbroken chair. "That was Pa's chair," he said, and Clara, understanding more than he knew, whispered, Then it stays empty. There was something about that moment, the way silence wrapped itself around the room, the way the children watched her, not with hope, but with a kind of exhausted expectation, that told Clara everything she needed to know. They had no one else, and neither did she. Without a word, Clara set down her satchel and moved toward the hearth. A girl with tangled braids and dirt-smudged cheeks stood slowly, gripping a wooden spoon like it was a sword. "I'm Ruth," she said. "I stir things. Mama used to, before she bled out after Jonah." Her voice was too steady for her age, too worn. Clara glanced into the pot on the fire, thin broth, a few beans, a single potato cut into 7 slivers. Hunger, not just for food, but for something else, something deeper, hung heavy in the air. She rolled up her sleeves, took a breath, and started again. From her bag, she pulled a scrap of salted pork she'd hidden from the conductor back in Kansas, crushed dry herbs between her palms, and poured in water from her canteen. As the new scent filled the small space, something shifted. The children sat up straighter. Even the baby stirred. Clara ladled the stew into chipped bowls, handing them out without fanfare. "Eat slow," she told them. "Let your stomach remember." They obeyed without a word. She didn't eat. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, stomach aching, but she let it. One meal wasn't for her. It was for them. For a hunger, she was learning, wasn't just about food. Later that night, after the bowls were empty and the tin bucket outside had been filled and emptied a dozen times for washing, Clara sat on the porch. The stars blinked cold and distant overhead, and the house behind her was finally still. And that's when she found it, the ledger, tucked beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, bound in a strip of torn fabric that once, maybe had been, part of a wedding dress. Inside, the handwriting was rough but careful. Births, deaths, crops planted and failed. And then on the back page, a simple note. Clara Mayfield arrives June 3rd. She's to be treated kindly. She has nothing, but we'll give her everything we've got. Can you imagine what it feels like to be chosen, not for what you have, but for who you might become? Clara closed the ledger gently. She looked back at the house, at the worn boots by the door, at the pile of shoes too small and too few. She hadn't come for a husband. She hadn't come for a house. She had come perhaps for something bigger, for a family she hadn't known she needed, and who in turn needed her just as much. Sometimes the first threat doesn't come with a knock at the door. Sometimes it drifts in quietly, like smoke on a cold morning. It was barely dawn when Clara spotted it, a thin, gray ribbon rising from the eastern ridge. No homes stood there. No kin lived nearby. Just empty land and now someone else's fire. At first she said nothing. The children were chasing each other across the frost-bitten yard, laughing, their bare feet kicking up tiny clouds of dust. How do you ruin a morning like that with fear? But Sam saw it too. He came in from gathering wood, eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the horizon. "That's not chimney smoke," he said quietly. "It's too dark." Clara's heart tightened. "How often do riders pass through here?" Sam shook his head. "Hardly ever, and not ones who build fires where they shouldn't." She nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. Out here, no locks on the door, only a wooden bar across the inside that creaked when dropped into place. Protection was thin as the walls around them. That night she let the stew boil longer than needed, its rich smell filling the house, a small comfort against the unease thickening in the air. She kept Ruth close to the baby. She didn't explain why, but children are sharp. They could feel the tension crawling through the floorboards. After the children had drifted into an uneasy sleep, Clara sat on the porch wrapped in her shawl. Sam joined her, silent as a shadow. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked after a while. "That someone's watching," she answered. "Maybe not for me. Maybe for the land." Sam shifted, uncomfortable. "You'd leave if it meant keeping us safe, wouldn't you? Clara stared into the dark beyond the faint glow of their single lamp. "I'd fight first," Sam chuckled, the sound too dry, too old for a boy his age. "You don't look like a fighter." "That's what makes it work," she said. In the distance, just past the tree line, something moved. A rider, tall, still, watching. And then gone. No sleep found Clara that night. Instead, by candlelight, she wrote a letter. Not to anyone back east, there was no one left to write to, but to the sky, to the trees, to the truth. "If I fall," she wrote, "let it be known I came, empty-handed and still made a home." By morning the smoke was gone, but so were 2 hens, and the woodpile had been trampled. No real harm, but a message, a warning. Later that week another rider came, but not the kind Clara feared. He dismounted slowly, his clothes dusty from travel, a satchel strapped to his saddle. His face was weathered, his eyes cautious. "I'm looking for Richard Walker," he said. "He's not here," Clara replied steadily. "Died 2 weeks ago. Snakebite." The man nodded, removing his hat with a respect that felt almost old-fashioned. "Warren Walker," he said. "His brother." Clara's stomach twisted. Sam stepped forward, confused. "Pa never said he had a brother." Warren's voice was rough. "Sounds like him. We didn't part on kind terms." "Why are you here now?" Clara asked. Warren opened his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in fabric. Another ledger, worn, but full. Pages inked with letters never sent. "He wrote to me every month," Warren said. "I never answered. Not until the last letter, the one that mentioned you." He held out a page torn from the back, written in the same uneven hand Clara now knew too well. "If I die before she arrives, let her keep the house. Let her raise them if she chooses, and if she doesn't, bury this letter with me and forgive me for hoping." Clara read it slowly, and when she finished, she didn't tremble. She didn't falter. "I'm staying," she said. Warren nodded. "Then there's one more thing." From the satchel he pulled a small, simple key. "To the safe under the floorboards," he explained. "It's not much. Just the last eggs he ever saved." Clara took the key, tucking it into her apron. It was heavier than it looked, not with gold or silver, but with trust. Isn't it strange how sometimes the things that weigh the most aren't what the world counts as valuable? That night, as the children slept and the fire dwindled low, Clara sat by the hearth, the key warm in her hand. She hadn't been chosen for riches, or security, or ease. She had been chosen for something much harder, and infinitely more precious. Sometimes life tests us not with thunder, but with a slow, creeping silence. It started with a cough, just a small one, dry, sharp, barely enough to stir the air. Jonah, the youngest after the baby, clung to Clara's skirt that morning. His cheeks flushed, his eyes heavy with sleep. By noon, Ruth was pale and quiet, the laughter gone from her face. Sam tried to brush it off, said it was just winter's breath catching up with them. But Clara had seen sickness before, the kind that didn't leave easily, the kind that moved fast like a shadow slipping through the cracks in the floorboards. Within 2 days, 4 of the children were burning with fever, small bodies tangled in quilts too thin to keep out the cold. Clara rotated wet cloths, boiled, bitter pine needle tea, whispered the same soft lie again and again. "You'll feel better by morning." She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. Her hands blistered from stoking the fire, her voice cracked from humming lullabies she didn't remember learning, and then the worst moment came. The baby stopped crying. No wail, no whimper, just silence. Clara gathered the child into her arms, heart pounding so loud she was sure it would wake the others. She rocked back and forth, feeling each shallow, fragile breath against her chest, praying without words. It's a terrifying thing, isn't it? When someone so small, so helpless, becomes quieter than the fear inside you. Warren returned the next morning. He hadn't meant to stay, just to drop off firewood and salted meat. But one look at the house, and he dismounted. without a word. Clara didn't waste time explaining. She just said, "They're burning up." And Warren, a man of few words, didn't offer comfort. He offered help. Together they worked without stopping. He built a steam tent out of blankets and boiling water. Clara spooned broth into mouths too weak to swallow. She sang when her hands couldn't lift anymore. Sam, dear, stubborn Sam, held on the longest, watching everything, helping when he could, breaking only when Ruth collapsed in the wash basin and didn't open her eyes for hours. "Is she gone?" he whispered. "Not yet," Clara said, pressing her forehead to Ruth's burning skin. "And not today." On the fourth night, Clara dropped to her knees by the fire. Her voice cracked, not from singing this time, but from pleading. "Don't take them," she whispered to the empty room. "Take anything else, but not them." And maybe someone, or something, listened. Because the fire, which had been little more than embers, flared. Not with heat, but with hope. Ruth opened her eyes. Jonah asked for bread. The baby whimpered, and Sam, too weak to smile, simply said, "You stayed." Clara nodded, tears spilling down her face. "There was never a day I wouldn't." That night she didn't sleep on the floor or in the rocking chair. She lay down among them, arms wrapped around the children who had once looked at her like a stranger. Now they breathed because of her, and in that breath they gave her a name, Mother, not by blood, not by law, but by the only thing that has ever truly mattered, by choice. Have you ever thought about that? How sometimes family isn't something you're born into. It's something you fight for. Something you earn, not with a name, but with love and staying power. Clara didn't come to Dry Creek to find a home. She came to build one, plank by plank, breath by breath, choice by stubborn choice. And in the flickering firelight of that small, battered house surrounded by fevered bodies and stubborn hopes, she realized something. The hardest homes to build are often the ones that last the longest. Some battles are fought without guns or fists. Some are fought with nothing more than the simple act of standing your ground. The sickness had barely left the house when the next storm came. Not fever this time, but men. 2 of them. Riders. They showed up uninvited, dressed in the kind of arrogance that's harder to scrub off than dirt. Their boots kicked up dust as they approached the gate, and their voices carried the false sweetness of people used to taking what they want. They didn't waste time. "We heard the bride showed up," the taller one sneered. "But no wedding means no rights. These kids, they're unclaimed now." He waved a folded piece of paper, a judge's stamp clear in the morning light. A custody order, legal, neat, clean on the outside. Inside the house, the children had heard the commotion. The door creaked open and Sam stepped out first, the old rifle resting in his hands. Unloaded, sure, but still a statement. Ruth followed, barefoot but fierce, standing shoulder to shoulder with Clara like a soldier with no armor. Clara didn't flinch. She had no lawyer, no formal title, no blood ties. Just a letter tucked safely in her apron, a deed never officially signed, and a house stitched together by the hands that had bled for it. "I have a letter, a deed, witnesses," she said, voice steady. The shorter man grinned. "That might hold in town. But you're out here, and out here, land in debt gets claimed, and orphaned kids get placed where they belong." He said placed like it was a favor. Like tearing these children away from the only home they had left was some kind of kindness. Sam tightened his grip on the rifle. Ruth crossed her arms. "We're not going anywhere," Sam said, his voice sharper than the edge of any law. "That's not your decision, boy," the man snapped. "Then whose is it?" Ruth shot back, her voice small but steady. "Pa's dead, Ma's buried, and this woman stayed when she could have run." Clara stepped forward, resting a hand on their shoulders. She met the men's eyes not with anger but with something stronger, something harder to defeat. "You'll do no taking today," she said. "This house may not have a title carved in stone, but it was built by hands that bled for it. And these children? They're not lost. They've been found. By me. And they're not going with anyone but each other. The taller man shifted, stepping forward like he might argue. But then, Warren appeared, silent, solid, shotgun resting casually over one arm. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Sometimes it's the quiet that speaks the loudest. The two men hesitated. The wind picked, uplifting dust between them. The kind of moment that's more about instinct than law. They spat into the dirt, muttered something about paperwork and sheriffs, and retreated. They left not because they were convinced, but because even cowards recognize when a house stands too firm to shake. When the dust settled, Clara turned to Sam, who hadn't lowered the rifle. "You stood for me," she said. Sam nodded. "You stood for us first." And in that moment, Clara understood something she hadn't been sure of until then. Home isn't about walls or papers or bloodlines. It's about standing for each other, about choosing, day after day, to fight for something even when the world says you have no right to. Tell me, what would you stand for even if you stood alone? Because sometimes it's not the things we inherit that make us family. It's the things we're willing to protect, no matter what. Some homes are built from brick and stone. Others are built from choices. Small, quiet choices that, over time, stitch something bigger than walls or roofs. After the men left, the house seemed to breathe again, not with relief, but with resolve. Clara knew survival wasn't enough. Not for her, not for the children. They needed more than full bellies and patched roofs. They needed to believe that this fragile thing they were building, could last. So they began, in the only way. People begin anything worth keeping, slowly. Clara stitched quilts from old flour sacks. She lined the drafty windows with wool and sang as she worked. Not because the songs were cheerful, but because silence had once been too heavy to bear. Every night they gathered around the table, not just to eat, but to tell stories. Small ones, funny ones, stories that made the walls feel less empty. Neighbors who had once kept their distance started showing up, not to take, but to give. A widow from up the ridge brought dried apples. A farmer down the road offered extra flour. Even the preacher, who hadn't dared visit during the sickness, sent a bundle of books wrapped in brown paper with a note scribbled in careful hand. "You've done what most of us only pray for." But the most unexpected visitor came just before the first heavy snow. A girl, no older than 16, barefoot and clutching a baby to her chest. She didn't knock. She just stood at the edge of the yard, too thin, too tired, too scared to move. Her lips were cracked, her eyes hollow, the same look Clara had once worn when she first stepped off the train. Sam saw her first and called for Clara. Without hesitation, Clara opened the door, walked out, and wrapped the girl in one of their patched quilts. "You're not late," she whispered. "You're right on time." The girl's name was Liza. Her baby was sick, but breathing. Ruth, without being asked, took the child gently from her arms. Sam put the kettle on the fire. They didn't ask questions, they didn't need to, because every person who's ever been lost carries the same look, the same question behind their eyes. Am I allowed to stay? And Clara, now with scars instead of doubts, knew exactly what to say. "You're not here to be saved," she told Liza later that night. "You're here to remember what it feels like to matter." Liza cried for a long time. Then she helped make breakfast the next morning, and she stayed. That winter was hard, harder than most, but not in the ways that mattered. The snow piled high. The wind howled like it had unfinished business with the hills. But inside the house there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from something deeper, something they had built together. Have you ever noticed how the hardest winters teach us the most about what it means to stay? How cold can test not just your body, but your will. Sam chopped wood in double shifts. Ruth took over the kitchen, her hands confident now, her voice strong. Liza mended boots and rocked babies with a steadiness that only someone who's been broken and rebuilt can know. And Clara? She watched it all, this house full of children and stories and second chances, and realized something simple but rare. Family isn't something you find. It's something you make day after day, choice after choice, even when you have nothing but your hands and a little bit of hope. By spring, the house stood stronger, not because of the wood or the nails, but because of them. Because sometimes, the surest shelter isn't the one built around you, it's the one built between you. Some stories don't end with a grand moment. Some end quietly in a way that feels less like a period and more like a door left open. Years passed and the house on the ridge changed. It grew, one board at a time, one bent nail after another. More rooms were added. A porch swing appeared, worn smooth by the weight of laughter and long conversations. A chicken coop stood in the yard, full of real hens now, the kind that laid eggs like small promises every morning. But some things never changed. The fire never went out. The sound of children's feet on old wood never faded. And Clara, she never left. She never remarried, never sold the land, never packed up and moved to somewhere easier. Instead, she stayed and kept building, not just walls and roofs, but something harder, something invisible. A life. A home. The children grew strong in ways that weren't just about height or age. Sam planted tomatoes in the corner of the yard, where his father once dreamed of a hen house. Ruth taught Liza how to sew boots and hold babies without fear. The younger ones stopped whispering at bedtime. They laughed now, loud, unashamed, as if they had finally learned that happiness wasn't something that could be taken from them. Neighbors stopped asking who the mother was. They just knew. The ledger that once sat hidden under a floorboard now rested openly on the mantel. Its last page, written in Clara's careful hand, read, Clara Mayfield Walker, head of household by heart, if not by law. No one questioned it. Not the preacher who came by to bless the land with quiet respect. Not the neighbor who offered to help fix the roof after a rough storm. Not even the county men who returned with fresh papers and red seals, only to find Ruth standing at the door, arms crossed, a rifle leaning casually beside her. We've got a judge's order, one said. We've got a mother, Ruth replied. They left without opening their satchel. Some truths are heavier than any piece of paper. Some homes are defended not by law, but by love. Before the years folded too far forward, Clara wrote one last letter. She didn't address it to anyone specific. She folded it neatly and tucked it into the ledger, alongside the names of all the children who had ever slept under her roof. It read, If you find this house, know that no one here was born lucky. But each of us chose to stay, chose to love, chose to build even when there was nothing to build with. So if you are lost, hungry, or unsure whether the world still holds people who won't let go, come in. There's soup on the fire and a bed in the corner. We've been waiting for you. Have you ever thought about that? About how the strongest homes aren't always the ones with high walls or locked gates, but the ones with doors that never close? Clara's house became that kind of place. Not just for the children she raised, but for anyone who needed a reminder that home isn't something you're given. It's something you choose day after ordinary day, and maybe that's the bravest choice of all. Some people spend their lives waiting to be chosen, waiting for a title, a promise, a signature that tells them they belong. But Clara Mayfield learned something different. She wasn't chosen by a wedding ring. She wasn't chosen by law or bloodline. She was chosen by 6 pairs of eyes that looked up at her, not with expectation but with a fragile kind of hope. She was chosen by the simple, quiet trust of children who had every reason not to believe in anyone. And Clara, in turn, chose them. Not because she had to, not because anyone told her to, but because sometimes love isn't about obligation. It's about decision. It's about waking up each day and choosing over and over again to stay when it would be easier to leave. What they built on that lonely ridge wasn't just a house. It wasn't even just a family. It was proof that home doesn't start with a roof or end with a bloodline. It starts with care, with patience, with the relentless belief that even in a broken world, something whole can still be made. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not a grand gesture. Not a picture-perfect ending. Just the everyday courage of showing up, of keeping the fire burning, of saying, "You belong here no matter what." Have you ever thought about what it really means to belong? About how family isn't always the people who share your name or your history, but the ones who stand by you, who choose you when they don't have to. That house on the ridge stood for years, not because the walls were strong, but because the love inside them was. Clara's story reminds us of something we often forget. You don't have to be chosen by the world to be needed. You don't have to have the right papers, the perfect past, the flawless plan. You just have to show up, day after day, quietly, stubbornly, lovingly, because family isn't given, it's built, choice by choice, hand by hand, heart by heart. And sometimes the most important thing you can offer someone isn't a perfect life, but a place where they're simply allowed to be loved. No questions, no conditions, just love, just home.